Hey, John, this is perfect with the limb and the rover and you and Stone Mountain.
All right, Granddaughter, talk to me about this image of you.
Well, this was our first stop on our geology exploration. This little crater here was Plum Crater. We landed back over here, over the horizon. Yeah, this is right after we got outside. First thing we did was deploy the lunar rover. Every Apollo flight had an American flag like this.
Oh, real runner on a hammer throw. Look at that beauty go.
When I painted this painting, I had to get in the headspace of Charlie Dugan, so I listened to a lot of Willie Nelson.
You did a wonderful job. I can't believe how lifelike it looks.
Cool.
I'm just so impressed with your work.
So, Granddaughter, you have been interviewed by countless number of people. Did you ever think that your granddaughter would be interviewing you?
Never. But I'm glad she is.
So this time, 52 years ago, you became the 10th and youngest person to have ever walked on the moon.
That's correct.
So you launched on Apollo 16 on the Saturn rocket, April 16th. Today is the 22nd of April. What would you be doing at this moment?
52 years ago, I was out exploring the moon. It's hard to say because our timeline was different than Earth time, but probably we were out on the moon.
And so back up to young Charlie. So you grew up during World War II. Your dad was in the Navy. What was that like growing up?
We were living in Columbia, South Carolina. I was like 4 years old. My dad worked for an insurance company, and so we were riding tricycles in those days and just having fun. And then we moved to Charlotte, where I was born. My brother Bill and I were twins, and we were born at Presbyterian Hospital. And I can remember Pearl Harbor. The very solemn moment, President Roosevelt was on the radio. Of course, there was no television back then. We just listened to the radio, and he was saying the Japanese had attacked. I guess my heroes became not cowboys and Indians, but the great generation, the soldiers, sailors, airmen who were fighting the war. We had duties that we did to help the war effort, collecting cans, collecting chewing gum wrappers, and everything like that. Everything was rationed, so we walked everywhere just about. And Johnston was a small town, like 1,000 people at the time. Mm-hmm. So it was a nice 2 years, and we played war. We made little model airplanes, and my grandmother had a 2-story house and a porch up top, and we'd make these little model airplanes and set them on fire and throw them off the porch to watch them crash, and which is similar to what we were seeing in the movies on Saturday. Mm-hmm. And anyway, it was a great 2 years. My dad came back, and like 1945, and we moved down to Florida, and we were there when the war ended. And when I got to high school, it was the beginning of the jet age, mm-hmm. and the jets were flying and making contrails way up in the sky. And
you said, I want to do that?
I said, I'd like to make a contrail. So how did I get to do that? So anyway, about the 10th grade, I decided that I wanted to go to the Naval Academy and sort of follow my dad's footsteps.
When did you realize at the Naval Academy that you wanted to go on to the Air Force, and how did you get there?
Well, when I got to the Naval Academy in the summer of 1953, I didn't even know you could go in the Air Force from the Naval Academy. So my idea was to be a naval officer when I got there. But while I was there, I fell in love with airplanes, and they gave us some exposure to flight at the Naval Academy. They had some old airplanes that were bi-wing, open cockpit, and they put you in the front seat and the instructor get in the back seat, and you had just tubes you talked to one another, no radios, and
Oh my gosh.
and these things were seaplanes, so they push you off into the water, and the engine was running, of course, and you took off. Man, it was a thrill to me, man. You're looking outside, and the wind blowing your hair. You had a helmet on. I just was hooked for aviation. So I was going to volunteer. I had a decision to make. Would I fly for the Navy or fly for the Air Force? And so I ended up having that decision made for me by the doctor at the Naval Academy, who gave me an exam in my senior year. We called it first class year. And he said, well, Midshipman Duke, you have an astigmatism in your right eye, and you don't qualify for naval aviation, but the Air Force will take you. So I went I said, that's it. That was the decision. That's what I'm going to do.
And do you still have this astigmatism?
Nobody's ever seen it
Never
since. No, I don't think so. But it's not disqualifying anymore. With glasses and stuff like that. And I was in flight school in October 1957 when the first satellite was launched. The Russians launched the Sputnik, and there it was circling the Earth, and beginning of the space age. And we've been trying to launch rockets and stuff like that, and people were getting interested in rocketry and stuff, but we had disasters. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, blow up rather than lift off, and so the Russians beat us into space with Sputnik. April of 1961, Yuri Gagarin launched. He was the first human being in space, and they beat us into space with humans. And so we were now in the space race with the Germans. They'd picked the first group of astronauts in 1959. As I started to Germany, they started their training as astronauts. There was 7.
Did you ever think that you were going to be one of them at the time?
No, I was too young, too inexperienced. That was my attitude. I said, well, I'll never be an astronaut, My time was going to be up in May of 1962. And I could extend a year, but I chose not to. I chose to go. I volunteered to go to, Air Force wanted me to go to graduate school. So I was sent to MIT to get a master's degree in aeronautics and astronautics. If I could have stayed another year, and if I'd have made that decision and gone to MIT a year later, I'd never been an astronaut.
Wow.
So, you just how these little things happen, these decisions that you make can have a real influence on the direction your life takes. So I try to tell all the young people who are making these decisions, keep your antennas up. And, you get a sense, I ought to do this. And so after the first summer, there were 4 of us bachelors, lived in the graduate house, which was a crummy place to live at MIT. And so we were looking for an apartment. We found an apartment that these 4 girls were moving out of, and we were going to move in after like late August, September timeframe. There was one of their friends was visiting them from University of North Carolina. Turned out to be my wife.
Wow.
So Dottie and I met, and we chatted for about an hour, and I was just awestruck. And by November, we were engaged.
What did Dottie think when you were saying, I'm going to apply to be an astronaut?
Well, at this point, that was not even a thought. We got married in the summer of June of '63, and then I didn't graduate for the next year, and astronaut wasn't even in my mind, really. I found out that MIT had the contract to build the Apollo guidance and navigation system, and so they needed two pilots to see if what they had built people could operate and effectively. And so we volunteered for that, and it was perfect. I mean, we proved that the system was really good. And during that time of 3 months of working on this system, I met some astronauts. And I had never, they were the second group and the third group. And I'd never met anybody that had a love and an excitement about their job more than these guys. So I said, well, how did I get that job? And they said, well, get your degree and go to test pilot school, and you might have a chance. So that's what I did. I volunteered for test pilot school, and the Air Force sent me to test pilot school after we graduated in June of '64, and we moved to Edwards Air Force Base in California, and I started test pilot school that summer. I read an article in the paper that said NASA's selecting the 5th group of astronauts, and it listed the qualifications, and hey, that's me. Being in the Air Force, you just don't apply. So I asked my boss, who was a famous test pilot, Chuck Yeager. He was coming down of the test pilot school. I said, sir, what I do? He said, I don't know, but we'll find out. So anyway, 4 or 5 of us at Edwards applied, and we sent our applications to the Air Force. The Air Force sent them on to NASA, and we started this process of selection. I think there were about 3,500 people that had applied. So they started weeding out some from physicals and things like that. 4 of us in our test pilot school got selected. About a month later, the head of flight crew operations, who was an astronaut, Deke Slayton, one of the original 7 astronauts, called me up and said, Charlie, we picked you if you still want to come. I said, yes, yeah.
Wow.
He said, report to Houston in 1st of April, I think it was.
Do you remember where you were when you got the call that said you're going to be an
I was
astronaut?
at work, yeah, and really happy. There were 4 of us in our test pilot school got selected, and in our class, and so we all had a big party that night.
Good.
At the officers'
Celebrate.
club,
You
yeah.
earned it. And how many, you were a part of 5 of the 7 Apollo missions? Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
Well, there were 9 missions to the moon, and I worked on 5 of them. I was Capcom on Apollo 10 and worked as what we called a support crew. There were 3 crews on every Apollo mission. There was a support crew, 3 astronauts, and we did the dog work for the crew, Capcom is capsule communicator. It's the astronaut in mission control that actually talks to the crew, and it's the only voice in mission control can actually transmit to the crew. And so it was a very responsible job.
Especially for Apollo 11.
Yeah.
The landing.
And so as a result of that went well, Neil Armstrong invited me to come be Capcom for Apollo 11, which was a surprise. I wasn't assigned to that crew, but anyway, I got to be Apollo 11, and so when they landed, I was Capcom for them, and which was very dramatic and very tense. We had a lot of problems. Everything was going great until we started our descent, and then we had communication problems. Then we had computer overloads, which were stunning to me. And then we had trajectory problem. which led to a fuel problem. So we got down to not on the ground, and I called 60 seconds. They had 60 seconds to land, or we were going to call an abort because of low fuel. And then I called 30 seconds, and they weren't on the ground. But about 13 seconds later, I heard Buzz Aldrin say, "Contact, engine stop," and they were on the ground. So
Wow. And you said,
I mean,
Roger.
the tension was just through the roof, you can imagine. And so when we heard that, it was just like popping a balloon. Shoo, the tension went out of the room. Everybody started clapping. And right after that, Neil Armstrong, I was really excited. And right after that, Neil Armstrong said, "Houston, Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed." And I was so excited, Tranquility came out twang. And I realized that's not right. So I said, "Roger, Tranquility, we copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again."
Thanks
And
a
it was
lot.
true. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Just fly high and straight and land tall. And the old flag. Come on out here and give me a salute.
They landed in the Sea of Tranquility, which is in the upper, as you view the moon, it was, at the center of the moon is the equator. It was in the upper right hand, like the 2 o'clock position on the moon.
And where was your landing site?
Ours
in
was
2016?
southwest of theirs. And we were in the mountains of the moon. They had landed in what was called the Mare. We were the only one that landed in the mountains. It was supposed to be geologically different, and it was. They were what was called igneous rock. And so it was very unique rocks. So a couple of 100 pounds we picked up over 3 days. And we never lost our excitement. We never lost our enthusiasm.
It's like a kid in a candy store when you
Exactly, yeah.
when you and John landed.
Yeah.
But you couldn't get out of the lunar
lu-
module. You had to go to sleep, right? when
Yeah,
you landed?
right. The flight plan called us to power down the lunar module after landing and then get out and put on our backpacks and go out and
Go and explore.
But we were 6 hours late landing because of a problem in the other spacecraft.
I can't even imagine. And that was Dot's biggest worry, was that you were not going to be able to land on the
Yeah.
moon.
Yeah.
Was that your biggest worry too, or did you?
Oh
have
yeah,
other
I mean that we trained for 2 years for this moment, and there it was, and they were telling me to come home.
Wow.
Yeah,
So once you landed, you had to go to sleep, and then you finally got to step out on the moon after your
right.
rest.
We
What
were
was
so
that like?
yeah. Well, when we landed, we were like two kids in a candy store. Look at this rock, John, over here. Look at that. Boy, I said, yeah, I can see that's down over here at Stone Mountain. And I went coming in, I saw North Ray Crater over some of our objectives, you know.
Mm-hmm. And you always say that when you're on the moon, it just felt like home.
Mm-hmm.
Is that because you've been studying it for so long? And
Yeah, we exactly. When we landed, we recognized the major features. As we came in, we had named a big crater Gator and one Lone Star, and we saw these big craters. We could see that as we came in. So all of the major landmarks we recognized. So we were almost dead on.
Wow.
We landed within 200 yards of where we were supposed to land. So.
And it's got to be so just serene up there.
Yeah, well, you can't get real quiet, but you're in awe. You realize you're on the moon and you're a long way from home.
Mm-hmm.
And
You knew the risks that were involved.
well, you didn't think about the risk. I mean, there was don't worry about something you can't do anything about.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a fighter pilot
Mentality.
attitude.
But the only time that really almost happened was when you and John were doing the Moon Olympics, right?
Yeah, well, that was at the end. Yeah, at the end, it didn't happen, but it could have happened. And we were trying to do the Moon Olympics and to close out. And 1972, the Olympics were in Munich that year, and we were in April, and the Olympics were going to be in August. So we thought we would do the Moon Olympics to close out our stay, 3-day stay. And I started bouncing. Down here with all of my equipment on, I weighed 363 pounds. Up on the moon, 60 pounds. Wow. 60,
So you could get pretty high?
Yeah, really high. And when I jumped, I straightened up. The backpack weighed as much as I did, so my center of gravity went backwards, and I went over like this. And you watch me flailing a little bit, trying to get balance. Fear, I had a lot of fear, and
when you were
going back, because if the suit broke, I'm dead. And fear is not a bad emotion if you don't panic. And I had this thought, roll right, so I rolled to the right and broke my fall on my right hand, and you could hear the pumps running, and I realized I was going to be okay. And John came over and looked down and says, "That wasn't very smart, Charlie." I said, "Yeah, help me up." So I helped me up. He helped me up, and I got up, and the TV camera was pointed right at me.
Good, it got it all on
They
camera.
got it all.
Sure it's on YouTube.
About 4 feet. Wow. Charlie, that ain't any fun, is it? That ain't very smart.
One of the last things I did was I'd taken a little photograph of my family with me, a little snapshot, and it was just the family, just us and the kids, and so on the back we'd written, "This is the family of astronaut Charlie Duke from planet Earth who landed on the moon."
And on the return back to the moon, did the boys, were they ecstatic, just saying, "In addition to my dad being back, I have my pictures up on the moon"? Who else can say that?
Yeah, I think they were young, of course, and Tom doesn't really remember much, but they were proud of their dad. We lived in a neighborhood with a lot of astronauts. Our next door neighbor had been on Apollo 8. Neil Armstrong lived a block away.
So they were used to it.
Us. So they were used to it, everybody.
It's just work.
Just work, yeah. Dad's got to go to work again, and he happened to be an astronaut.
And when you came back, you were seen as an American hero. What was that like?
You had to accept that role. Nobody volunteered to become a hero. Mm-hmm. Apollo was a program America could be proud of. And we wanted to display our prowess in technology and organizational ability and all of that. And so the crew was led the parade, the phase of it, the front face. It was good to see America still enthusiastic. We were the fifth landing. You would not necessarily say, "Oh, ho, hum." And the political climate was changing a little bit, because why are we spending so much money on the moon? Well, my response to that was, we didn't spend a dime on the moon. It's all spent in the United States of America to buy all this 400,000 jobs and all this technology now that 40 years later we take for granted. But it's all rooted in the space program.
Straight, lamp home. Okay, Charlie, stay where. Here we go. Good again. One for you. Okay, wait a minute, one more. This looks like a good time for some good news.
So when you came back to Earth, you had my dad, Charles, my uncle Tom, ... and y'all lived back in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
What did family mean to you coming back to Earth?
Well, it was good to be a dad a lot of times. And after Apollo was over in January 73, the thought occurred to me, what are you going to do now? And that was a real problem with a lot of the moonwalkers. You know, we were at the pinnacle of our career, at the top. And now what? 36 years old, you know. Well, I guess I took my eyes off the moon and put them on money. Our marriage got so bad we started thinking about divorce. And Dottie was even, as she says in her story, suicidal. And, you know, this is all there is to life. I'm so miserable, my marriage falling apart, why live any longer? we were in church, but we had no foundation. We just had knowledge. But we were going to church, and one weekend we had a thing at church called Faith Alive, and these people came, couples, 10, 12 couples came, and they shared their faith about what the power of God to change a life. And it was Jesus, 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 and they had a peace and a love and a joy that we didn't have. Dottie looked at them and said, "Y'all are different." And so after that weekend was over, she went into our bedroom, and I think she prayed something like, "Jesus, if you're real, I give you my life. If you're not, I want to die." And over the next couple of months, I watched her change from sadness to joy. And we were living in New Braunfels, Texas at that time. Oh, well, later on. We moved in January of '76. Yeah. And so I was making a lot of money in my business, and but I wasn't satisfied and wasn't happy. And so we had joined a new church, and she was really on fire for the Lord and had a ministry going and this and that and the other. Anyway, she saw how upset I was with the company, and she said, "Why don't you pray?" I said, "Pray for what?" I said, "Well, pray for whether God wants you in the beer business." I was in the beer business. "Want you in the beer business or not?" And so I said, "Well, you pray." And so she prayed a one-line prayer that was, "God, if you want Charlie in the beer business, if you don't want Charlie in the beer business, make it so miserable that he sells out." So over the next 6 months, things got worse and worse and worse, but the money got better and better and better. So you chase the emotions or you go for the money. So finally I said, we sold out. And that was in March of 1978. And made a lot of money when we sold the business. I had a partner, so we split up. And the very next month, this guy, doctor friend of ours, invited me to a Bible study at the tennis club on one weekend. And so I didn't want to go, but he talked me into it. So it was at that Bible study that my life changed. The book of John, in the Gospel of John, it says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only son. If you believe in him, you'll not perish but have everlasting life." Now that's either true or a big lie. And we get to decide. God's given us free will, so you can decide to believe that or reject that. And several other scriptures came to mind and that we'd studied that weekend, and I realized it's all up to me. And I'd seen what Jesus had done for Dottie. And so sitting in my automobile that Sunday afternoon, I looked over. She was there for the Bible study. And I said, "Darling, there's no doubt in my heart that Jesus is the Son of God." I said, "Lord, I gave you my life." For the very first time in my life, I experienced the peace of God. And I knew that my life wouldn't be the same. And so ever since then, we've been serving the Lord and growing our family. You come along and all of our other grandchildren. And that's, so instead of cursing my children, I'm trying to bless my children and my grandchildren. And now we got a great grandbaby. You know. And God's just changed our life. And so we have a ministry now that we go around and speak around the world. And I also do motivational speaking, but also we accept ministry offers to come to churches or Christian organizations or whatever to share our faith. And a lot of times we go to secular meetings and they say, "What's the most important thing happened to you?" Expecting to hear the moonwalk. But I said, "It's the walk with Jesus." The moonwalk lasted 3 days. walk with God is forever.
So when you look at the moon, what do you see?
I've been there. It's a very meaningful experience, and it's been a big part of the change in my life and the opportunity, one of 12 men to walk on the moon, now only 4 of us left alive, to motivate kids to aim high, if you will, reach for the stars. And I'm so thankful that God gave me the opportunity to see that part of His creation and to look back at Earth and there, as it's described in the Scriptures, the Old Testament said when God made the earth, He suspended it upon nothing, and that's exactly what it looks like. I want to be faithful to God on sharing this and motivating to kids and growing up I tell them to keep their antennas up, so you never know where life's gonna go. I ended up as an astronaut. It wasn't even an astronaut when I was those kids' age. So hopefully our story has an effect, both spiritually and psychologically, on folks.
That's beautiful.
That's my story, and I'm sticking with it.
Thank you, Granddaughter.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Love you.
Love you too. Mwah.